So if you've read my book, you're familiar with this idea of the sobering truth. That's what this video is going to be about, is the sobering truth about suffering and life. The Buddha said, life is suffering. It's the #1 principle that Buddhism is based on. I'm not a religious person. I don't subscribe to any particular religion. I do think that there are gems and pieces of wisdom and life advice that can be gained from the various religions. I just don't subscribe to any particular one. But that one is a pretty powerful one. Life is suffering. And to the extent that if you don't at least feel a twinge of that, if you don't feel that that is in some part true, this whole idea of spirituality, of becoming a spiritual badass, of enlightenment, of spiritual awakening, whatever you want to call it, is probably not going to work for you. So, yeah, big chunk of sobering truth there. Let's take a deep breath. And I think the reason I'm feeling that I'm wanting to speak about this today is just because of some circumstances that occurred with me in the last couple of days, and that's usually how any of these video topics come up. So I'll share with you that why I'm a believer that life is suffering. And there's a paradox here too. Don't confuse this. There's a paradox here, that what happens is that when you do discover your inner spiritual badass, when you do wake up, when you make headway in the spiritual process, this concept of life is suffering shifts. And I'll explain how in a bit. So at least my story. So I have cancer. I have prostate cancer. If you don't know that. I was diagnosed 2 months ago. So right there, right? Life is suffering. Hell yeah. Sort of unavoidable to think that, right? It's no big deal in a grand scheme of things. I have the least amount of cancer to get in the club. It is not spread. I'm going to have my prostate removed. I'm actually having that operation next week. But so I've been making a lot of hospital visits about this. So I went to the hospital yesterday to have a professional COVID test, and I was just hit in many ways. I was saddened by my experience yesterday. So I went to the hospital, and there was a woman working at the counter, and you could tell she was just, you know, it was a difficult job. It's a factory job of people coming in, and here's your swab and do this and put it in your nose, and then she has to seal it up and put it away. It's a grim, not a very fun job. So I tried to lighten the mood. I said something that was sort of, you know, quirky and funny, and man, there was just no response from her. I just couldn't get her out of her little box that she was in, her box of suffering. I mean, what else can it be? If that's your day-to-day existence and job, and you go in and you're grim and just unhappy, that comes across very evident, and this is how this woman was, and I just felt bad for her. Life is suffering. So then I'm in and out pretty quick, and I leave the hospital, and I'm on my way home, and I'm going through downtown Main Street in Charlottesville, and there's this young man on the side of the road, kind of on the sidewalk, and he is just like, he's doing all this gesticulations like this, and he's standing with his shirt, button-down shirt was wide open, and he was clearly tripping on drugs, and this was like, I don't know, 10 in the morning or something. Or some combination of alcohol and drugs, who knows. But I saw him, and I just felt, I felt petty, because I internally felt that this, the whole experience I had with a woman kind of soured my day. And then I saw this young man, and I was like, I ain't got no troubles compared to him. But I just felt really bad. I just I mean, what kind of life has this individual had to lead to that, where he's on a Friday morning at 10 a.m. publicly completely high and or intoxicated and lost in his own little world of misery and depression and it just got to me. So then I came home, and now I'm going to take my story and go back a few days. I had a dinner with a friend a couple nights ago who's also into spirituality, and a really great guy, and I've known him for a long time, and he's had an interest in Buddhism, and we were talking about spirituality, of course. And I think at some point in our conversation, I broke down. I said, "Man, no matter what you do, at the end of the day, this being here is difficult. I don't care how enlightened or awake or spiritual badass you are. It's a tough business to be here, And Buddha said it best: life is suffering." And he looks at me and he goes, I never got on board with that part of Buddhism. I never understood that. And so up to this point, a lot of our conversation had been about his limitation of progress, his feeling stuck or stymied to a certain degree. And I didn't say anything to him at that time, but I mean, there it is. Is that if there isn't something pushing you forward, i.e. this feeling that this isn't enough, there's got to be more than this shit. There's got to be more than this just raw existential fight for life, i.e. suffering. There's got to be more than that. And if that isn't sort of in some way, shape, or form pushing you forward on the spiritual path, you won't make progress. It is a absolute. This does not mean that we are being nihilistic, like it's all pointless and just fucking off yourself. No, I'm not saying that at all. Again, there's a paradox here with regards to making progress on the spiritual path, and I'll let you know what I mean by that right now. So what's really weird about this concept of life being suffering is that before one wakes up to their internal badass, to knowing thyself, life is suffering, and you react to that condition. You're hurting socially or with family or with friends, and you're aggravated, you're angry, you're upset, etc. So you jostle things around, and for a little bit it maybe improves or whatever, and then things fall apart again, and then you move on to the next. And that could be applied to any situation in life. You never arrive. You never arrive. The carrot is always being held out in front of you that someday you're going to get there, someday you're going to get there. And you continually react to this condition of life is suffering. Okay, so now get involved in spirituality. You do the things that one needs to do to wake up, to find your internal badass, to know thyself. And now what happens is this concept of life is suffering does not go away. It by no means goes away. I got bills to pay. I can stub my toe on the sidewalk. I have to deal with a family that has ups and downs and problems and whatnot. So life continues to be a challenge. It continues to be and manifest itself as this struggle to survive, as this suffering quality. As I suffer through it. The difference is, here's the difference. It's a pretty big one. Is that now instead of reacting to all of this, you respond. And there's a huge difference between reaction and response. Response implies that you're in touch with some greater part of yourself that's not suffering. Response means that there's this self-awareness that you realize that actually, despite all of the suffering in this condition, in this realm, there's a part of you that's not suffering. There's a part of you that's okay. There's a part of you that can always take a deep breath and find your center and be okay. Paradoxically, in the midst of suffering. Like, I'm going through some pretty wild-ass suffering shit next week when I got to go to the doctor and be put under for 4 hours, and they surgically remove my prostate, and then I got to stay in the hospital. I get a catheter in my private parts, and I got to deal with that for a week. It's not going to be fun. But thank God there's a part of me that's okay. Thank God I'll be able to respond to that thing and not react to it and be uptight about it. See, the thing is, here's the trick. When life is suffering and you realize life is suffering, you kind of relax into it. You're like, yeah, shit's gonna go wrong. Shit's gonna go wrong, man. And that's being a badass. Is like having your flexibility in your knees and being able to ride the waves as they come toward you, instead of fighting against them and thinking that you're gonna find the calm seas forever. It's not gonna happen. Spiritual badasses accept the waves, accept the rockiness, the ups and the downs. And in doing so, in accepting that life is suffering, somehow, weirdly enough, it's not all suffering. So this is a concept that a lot of people have a hard time with it because it's the paradox. Paradox always gets people. Paradox, it's like, this work is not A to B, C to D. It is not that way. It is a loop-de-loop, convoluted, weird process where there's deconstruction, where there's this juxtaposition of peace and tranquility and okayness mixed with the horror of life. I hope I'm making sense. If I'm not making sense here, and you're not understanding that life is suffering, allow me to elucidate a little further. So we've all, I think, can agree on the bullshit that we just went through, the suffering that we just went through with COVID-19, right? That was no fun. It continues to basically be no fun. I mean, it's getting better right now, but here we're coming out of this, and now what is there? Now what is there? There's fucking Ukraine. There's fucking World War III breathing down our necks. And Jesus Christ. And then what's it going to be next? Because there will be a next. So you see, there's on a large macro scale, it just goes from one bullshit dumpster fire to the next bullshit dumpster fire. Yeah, in between, sometimes there's a couple of years where things don't seem so bad, but the next one is always coming. There's always another bad movie coming to the movie theater. There's always a bad drama coming. So that's just on a macro level, and on a micro level, I've already sort of explained it. It's a carrot. You're comfortable for a little while, and then you become unsatisfied with what you have, and you want to get more, and then on to the next crisis or drama or whatnot that the unsatisfied ego goes after. It's never, the sea of life is never calm and flat for long. And that's what Buddha meant by life is suffering. There's always a storm brewing that's going to stir up the waves, and in some instances stir up a tsunami. So don't despair at that. Don't have a nihilistic feeling about that. Don't like, oh fuck it, well nothing's worth it. Don't have that. Don't give in to that, because that's bullshit too. That's utter bullshit. There's still a part. There's still this weird thing that I don't even fucking ultimately understand. Like why does the universe, why does existence do this shit? There's still some part of us that's okay. There's still some underlying deep-seated truth to this whole madness that somehow makes it okay. Again, I don't completely understand it, but I do experience it. And the experience that I have is that, yeah, life is suffering, but miraculously, weirdly, paradoxically, there's a part of my existence that I'm very grateful that I've connected to that is beyond this suffering. That is beyond it. And that, my friends, is the sermon of the day.